If you're looking for a story of so many different parts and how they suddenly fit together and it makes a huge difference, well, you've come to the right place. You know those moments in life where you go through something, you're like, how is this ever going to help me? And then it's like 10 or 20 years later and you're like, oh, this is how this all works. Well, Aussie Dave Adamson is a man who truly lives out that story. From the digital engagement spaces to some of the terrible things he went through as a child, to his heart of understanding what it means and the change that the Bible can make in people's lives, and how all of that has come together. So he now heads up the Bible app YouVersion here in Australia, in this part of the world. Aussie Dave's going to be joining us in just a moment here on the podcast. Before we get to that, please like, rate, review, subscribe to this podcast. It helps us get the word out to more and more people. We've just got a passion to let more and more people know about these stories. It's always going to be free, but we just love getting it out to more and more people. Thank you so much for doing that. That would be a wonderful thing, a blessing to me. Thank you. All right, let's have a chat to Aussie Dave. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me, Clayton. It's great to be here.
I really am looking forward to talking a bit about this, the YouVersion Bible app. It's been downloaded, I think, like over 1 billion times now around the world, right?
Yeah, that's right. And 8.3, about to cross 8.4 million times in Australia at the time of this recording.
Just incredible. Half of those may be from my kids, I'm not sure, but they absolutely love what is occurring. And I realize have had so much input into their world through the YouVersion Bible app. It is really a source for them of learning and growth and encouragement, which is fantastic. Yeah. We are going to lead to that and a little bit about what it might mean for you, whether you're somebody who has a faith in Jesus or somebody who has never explored that. Actually, there's opportunities around this, so we'll talk about that a bit later on. But let's start with your journey. Dave, you didn't start out working for a Bible app, these sorts of things. As you're sort of growing up, I know one of your first jobs was heavily involved in sports, actually. Talk to us a bit as you're growing up. Faith and sports, were they a part of your world as you grew up?
Well, sports was, Clayton, but faith certainly wasn't. In fact, if you had told, 15-year-old version of Dave that one day I would be working for the Bible app, I would have laughed at you and scoffed and walked away probably, because no, faith wasn't part of my journey growing up at all. In fact, I grew up in a household that was very anti-church. I remember conversations with my dad growing up where he was very skeptical of Christians and skeptical of Christianity and skeptical of church. And it wasn't really until year 11 in high school. I went to a state high school in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and there were 3 Christians at our school. And one of them was particularly weird. He had like Bible verses and Christian bands written all over his backpack. And I got stuck with him in a computer science course, and I had to do a 6-week project with him. And over the course of those 6 weeks, Clayton, I asked, I reckon, every question I could think of about God, Jesus, the Bible, church, faith, just about everything I could think of. And this kid answered all my questions. And if he didn't know the answer, he would say to me, hey, I don't know the answer, but my dad's a pastor, and I'll ask him and we'll figure it out together. And so that sparked a friendship between the two of us, and I got to go over to his house, and he started to invite me to events. And then ultimately, went to an event that he invited me to. And honestly, mate, as I sit here today, I could not tell you a single thing that was said. I don't know any of the bands that played. I don't know who the final speaker was. But at the end of the night, somebody said, if you want to come down and become a Christian, just come and kneel at this giant cross. And I was like, I'm never going to do that. I was a shy, withdrawn, timid kid. But I looked over to my right, and I remember seeing my mate sitting there. His head was down. His eyes were closed. There were tears streaming out of, down his face. And I remember hearing God say, he's praying for you. And in that moment, that was really the first time I remember feeling unconditionally loved. And I opened my eyes and found myself kneeling at this giant cross. I don't know how I got down there. And then a guy came and gave me a Bible and said, you just became a Christian, congratulations. And went home and woke up the next morning. It was Sunday morning. I walked to the nearest church. It was about 3 kilometers away, walked in the door, and haven't turned back since.
um, Dave, I know that was obviously a fundamentally changing experience, as you said. The next day, here we go. You haven't looked back, but
Yeah.
It wasn't just this idea of not being a part of a situation of faith. There was abuse that occurred in your world and these sorts of things too. Was there questions that you had to ask around, and were some of those questions around, well, why would God let this happen to a kid and things like that?
Yeah. So the reason that I grew up so shy and timid and withdrawn was because, from the ages of 6 till 12, I was sexually abused by an uncle. Um, and the scars that left on me are things that I still, I don't think I'll be fully healed from this side of heaven. I keep on a regular basis getting counseling and going to see psychologists, not because I'm broken, but because I'm breathing. And so, growing up, that fundamentally made me into a kid that was just extremely withdrawn, extremely shy, very, very fearful, had that fight or flight mentality all the time. And, hyper awareness was part of my world. And so by the time I got to grade 11 in school and I started talking with this kid, I remember asking him questions about Noah's Ark. I remember asking him questions about Adam and Eve and dinosaurs and, all of those questions that a teenager might ask back in the day. But really the fundamental question that I was asking him was, if there really is a God, then why did he allow to happen to me what happened to me? And while I never said those words that way, because I wasn't ready to talk about the abuse at that point in my life, I know now, looking back, that was the question that I was really trying to answer. And that's why, looking over and seeing my friend praying for me, that's why I felt that unconditional love for the first time in my life. I remember going to his family's house for dinner, and I saw a family that operated quite normally, like for the first time. There wasn't any of the intimidation that I experienced at my own home. I saw a dad who unconditionally loved his son and was proud of his son. And so those experiences stirred up more questions in me. But what it ultimately boiled down to was understanding that I was unconditionally loved through that process. That God was with me the entire time. And now, Clayton, I get the opportunity to share my story in churches, at schools, at conferences, in prisons. And when I talk about my story now, one of the things I talk about is the way that God can redeem your story. And redeem is one of those Christian words that, a lot of your listeners have probably grown up hearing and understand a definition of. But for me, Clayton, when I think of the word redeem, and especially when I think about it in the context of my story of being sexually abused for 6 years, what I think of is I'm going to make the enemy wish he'd never messed with me in the first place. And so when I share my story, I share it from a point of view of understanding that, as Corinthians tells us, I am a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. And I'm going to talk and share about my story as often as I can, because what it does in the people who are in the audience is anybody who suffered the same sort of abuse, whether it was as bad as I am or somewhere else on the scale. And data tells us that that's a lot of people, anywhere from 1 in 3 to 1 in 6 people have suffered some sort of sexual abuse as a kid. What it allows them to do is start to redeem their story, to start to come out of their shell, to start to get the help that they have so desperately needed for all of these years, but didn't think that they had permission to. And honestly, talking about it as a man, especially an Aussie guy, in Australia, it's such a rare thing at times that I know that gives other people the permission to go second. And so I want to give people the permission to go second. I'll come out and I'll go first, and I'll open up the door if it allows them to step into some version of getting the healing that they so desperately need.
So here we are. This is part of what that story is, and now suddenly there's this life change occurring. We've talked about the fact that you're working with work with this Bible app now. You've worked in
Yeah.
churches, but that didn't happen straight away. Actually, that love of sports
No.
was a big part of it. You actually spent time
Yeah.
as a journalist in sports for, was it like a
Yeah.
decade and a half or so, something like that?
Yeah. So even after I started following Jesus as a year 11 kid, I still didn't want to be be in full time ministry. That was the last thing I wanted. I'd grown up wanting to be a sports reporter, and so I went to university in Geelong in the western suburbs of Melbourne and got my journalism degree, and started working for local newspapers. Then I worked for the Footy Show magazine. It was a short-lived magazine that maybe your Melbourne listeners might remember. And then from there, I went to the AFL and worked for the AFL Record, became the youngest ever editor of the AFL Record, and then went to Channel 10. And for about 8 years, I was a reporter producer for Sports Tonight, which ironically is just having a comeback. I don't know if you knew this, but Channel 10 is reinstating Sports Tonight. So as I'm watching the commercials of that, I'm remembering my old past, where I got to fly around the country and interview athletes. I covered AFL, obviously, as my bread and butter as somebody who grew up in Melbourne, but also got to cover English Premier League, the Grand Prix. I covered 7 Australian Open tennis tournaments during that period. So, I mean, from an Australian point of view, Clayton, I'm sure you can imagine, like I had the job that all of my mates wanted.
Yeah.
Like I was the hero of the story because they're like, hey, can you get me into this? Yeah. I was sitting down talking to Roger Federer last week. It was that sort of stuff that was, now it just blows my mind. But yeah, that was what I cut my teeth on. And that's where I really developed the skills and the experience to be able to do actually what I'm doing now. I thought when I was in the middle of that, especially once I reached Channel 10 and TV reporting level, I thought I've reached the top of the tree here. Like that, my career doesn't go any higher than this. This is the pinnacle. But what I realized was, man, God had so many other things in mind. God had so many other things planned that I could never have predicted. But I'm so glad that He took care of it.
Yeah. So you did actually make this decision after this to say, well, I'm actually going to start looking at this, this faith life that's been building and these experiences. I'm going to start jumping into some of this work. What was that first sort of work that you said, all right, this is going to be a bit more faith focused now?
Yeah, well, I actually, about 2007, ESPN in Connecticut called me and asked me if I'd come out and interview for a job at ESPN Sports Center, which again, for the people who aren't aware, ESPN is the biggest sports channel in the world. And so that seemed like potentially the next step in my career. And I went over and I interviewed and came back. And as my wife and I were mulling over this opportunity, what we both felt was that this is not what God had planned for us. And so I actually turned it down. I turned down what I thought was my dream job. And at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, to be quite frank. And so I reached out to a pastor friend of mine in New Jersey who I'd just been listening to his sermons on podcasts, because podcasts were a thing back then, on my original iPod, with the clicky wheel and everything. And I would listen to him preach on his podcast as I drove into Channel 10 every day and as I drove back home. And so when I decided that this opportunity was something that was not the next step for me, I contacted this pastor and I just said, hey, I think I'm getting called into full-time ministry, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what that sounds like. I have no idea like what the next step is. Is there any chance that like you could give me some advice? And so he emailed me back and said, hey, here's my cell number. Can you give me a call? And so I called him, and within about 10 minutes, he was like, Dave, you're the guy I've been praying for. I've been praying for somebody to lead our church online ministry that we're about to launch at our church. Again, this was like late 2007. And I've been praying for somebody who has strategy capabilities, yes, but also has production experience, who has on-camera experience, who is a journalist and can write experience as well. And so, I fit the bill perfectly for this guy. And so he flew me out, and this guy was from New Jersey, a church called Liquid Church in New Jersey, still going strong, multiple campuses now. And the long story short is they offered us a position, and I packed up my wife and our three daughters, and we all moved to New Jersey, from Melbourne to New Jersey in about March 2008. And that's where it really started. I became the seventh online pastor in the world and started doing digital ministry. And what I realized was all of the experience that God had given me in my hands was starting to match the vision that He'd placed in my heart. And so I could use the skills that I developed on TV and through magazines and through newspapers and start to leverage those skills for a kingdom purpose. And that's when, my whole world changed.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that before we head to a break, and then we're going to hear a bit more of the story. So as this started and you started exploring this and putting this into effect, I'm imagining more and more and more people were starting to see what it was, and they were having more and more impact as this became a thing. Like you said, only like seventh online pastor in the world, and here you are sort of forging the way. Talk to us about some of those next experiences.
Yeah, very early days of the online. It was a wild west. It was a wild west. This was still like again 2008. We had to start a volunteer team to help support what we were doing, and trying to get people on board at that point. Nobody understood what an online church was, and so I got to connect with the people, the team at Life Church in Oklahoma. They were the only ones really excelling at online ministry at the time. And this is how I know that I was in that first group, because a couple of the pastors in the US who were doing online ministry, we all got together in a Facebook group and we started, sharing tips and tricks. And so, we were really making things up as we went along. But what we realized, and this is where, at the time, we started to see that there are a lot of people who wanted to connect with the church before they connected with the church in person. So they would connect online before they connected on site. And the more that happened, our audience grew and grew and grew. And then obviously, back in those days, we would get people watching from around the world because there wasn't many other options from a church service point of view. And I remember saying to the leadership team at the church multiple times, hey, we had, 1,000 people watching from 57 different countries. And I thought that was the win. But then as I went deeper and deeper into the online ministry world, and as social media came and social media rose, and then a new thing started to come in, interest media, where it's not as social anymore. And again, you probably know this from your own social media. It's very rare that you engage or see content from people you're actually social with. It's now like, what am I interested in? And the algorithm throws that up at me. But as we started to delve into more and more of those things, my philosophy started to change. I started to realize the big win wasn't about reaching people from other countries. It was reaching the people who live within driving distance of our church building, the people who had questions that I had when I was a kid about faith, about the Bible, about Jesus, about God, about church. How could we reach them and answer the questions that they were actually asking, not answering the questions that we hoped they were asking? And so as my philosophy started to shift and we started to shift as a ministry, what happened was we saw a lot more people move from online to on-site. A lot more people would come to the church. And every week somebody would come up to me and say, hey, you were the first pastor I met at this church because I watched online for 4 months before I had the courage to walk through the door. And that for me really highlighted, and still to this day, really highlights the power of churches using digital ministry for discipleship, for church services. It's not just about keeping people online. It's moving them from online to on-site, online to on-site. That allows us as pastors, as church leaders, to be in people's lives on an everyday basis because we can connect with them through the assembly place of the modern world, which is not a town hall. It's not a town square unless, the Aussies are playing in the World Cup and everybody goes to Fed Square. But for most people, the place that they assemble now is online. It's on social media. I mean, I do this in my own family, right? I can be up late at night watching a funny video. Well, I send it to our group chat as a family so that my daughters and my wife can see it. And that's how we connect. That's how we engage. That's how we assemble in the modern world. And so I want to help churches and ministries leverage that technology to connect with more people on a daily basis.
My guest is Dave Adamson here on Towards Understanding. We're going to be back hearing more of this story and the remarkable role that YouVersion is actually playing around our world today, the YouVersion Bible app, and Dave's role in that as well. That's all on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
This is Towards Understanding. You're with Clayton Bielen. We're having a chat to the man who's heading up the YouVersion Bible app here in Australia, Dave Adamson, today. We've been hearing a bit of his journey from crazy sports fan and understanding faith in his middle to late teenage years, and then eventually actually jumping into the world of digital ministry and being one of the first to do that with churches around our world as well. You're based over in the US at that point. Is this where the name Aussie Dave came around? Because I know that a lot of people just refer to you as Aussie Dave, and when you're in Australia and New Zealand, that feels a little weird, but I'm assuming it wasn't over in the States.
Yeah, that's exactly where it started. It wasn't something that I chose for myself. So when I moved to New Jersey to start at a church called Liquid Church, when I got there and I asked for my email, they gave me the email that said Aussie Dave at Liquid Church. That was my email at the time. And I said, why did you choose that? And they said, well, we already have a David on staff and we already have a Dave on staff. And so we couldn't use Dave at Liquid Church or David at Liquid Church. So we had to go with something else. So I just told the lead pastor, I just told him to use Aussie Dave. And that's literally where it started. Aussie Dave started there. It followed me when I moved to Atlanta to work at a church called North Point. The nickname followed me there as well. And it's interesting, Clayton. I came back to Australia in 2021, right? My family and I moved back. And I thought, oh, well, from now on, I'm just Dave. But the amount of people who still, in Australia, who still call me Aussie Dave, and the amount of people who even just call me Aussie, it's so weird. It's fun, but it's also a little bit, wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, fair enough as well. Dave, I also know that there's a lot of incredibly deep interest that you have around the understanding the first century culture of the Bible from the New Testament, or perhaps the older understanding of the Hebrew, the original Hebrew as well.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about how that has had a big impact and a big passion for you, which you've been able to incorporate in a whole lot of your work, actually? Where did that come about?
Yeah, so that actually came about when I was in New Jersey. First time in full-time ministry. I'd been commissioned as a pastor, and I'd never been in that position before. And so I thought, I got to learn from some people, like what they do. And so I lived in a town, and around the corner from where I lived, there was a Jewish synagogue. And so I just walked up to the door one day, knocked, and this Rabbi Lubin, opened the door and welcomed me in, and we started having a conversation, and we started having coffees together. And then I joined his Torah class, and I really wanted to learn about ministry, but also I wanted to learn the scriptures as well. And from my perspective, I figured the best person I can learn from is somebody who has memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, all of them, all first 5 books of the Bible he had memorized. So I thought, I want to learn from him, because he's the guy who, I probably at the time could say that I probably had memorized maybe 20 verses, but this guy has memorized the first 5 books of the entire Bible. And so I met with him on a regular basis for about 2 years, and he started teaching me things and teaching me some Hebrew words that really fundamentally shifted and changed my faith. One of the first words he taught me was the Hebrew word Shema, which means to hear, H-E-A-R. But the word also means to obey. So I would think of it from a dad's point of view when I would say to my girls, hey, did you clean your room like I asked you to? I'm not asking if they heard me. I'm asking if they obeyed me. And so that really made sense to me. And it made me realize when Jesus says, he who has ears, let them hear. He's not just saying, did you hear what I said? He's saying, did you do what I said as well? And so That's where it grew from. It grew out of those early meetings with Rabbi Lubin for 2 years.
Yeah. I know this has gone on and become a thing. You actually lead tours to Israel when that's possible. And you've just continued and continued and continued growing in this understanding as well. I'm imagining, certainly for me over my journey, as I have just tried to delve deeper and deeper, it has so much more meaning to what I'm reading in the Bible or understanding, or the wisdom of what is actually being there as I understand that. It must be a real thrill to constantly be learning, and I'm assuming you never stop learning on this space.
Yeah, exactly. I don't ever want to stop learning things, especially about the stuff that I'm interested in. And obviously for me, scripture, and I think for everybody who's a follower of Jesus, scripture is that thing that they need to be super interested in. There's a famous quote, I think it was from Thomas Jefferson. He said, an educated man knows something about everything and everything about something. And I want to make sure that I know everything I can about that something that is most important to me, which is God's word. And so, I keep learning and delving, and everything that I learn, I pass on to people either through my Instagram account or, I've written a couple of books, 52 Hebrew words every Christian should know. And I've got a new book coming out, 52 Hebrew prayers that every Christian should know. And so I just try to pass it on to other people because I know how much it's impacted me. And when people talk to me about, oh my gosh, you've got so much insight. No, I don't. I'm just learning stuff. I learn and I pass it on. I learn and I pass it on. And so, that's the process that I hope I have until I take my last breath, I suppose.
Yeah. Let's continue talking about some of this journey to where it has actually led you today in heading up YouVersion. Maybe for those who don't know what the YouVersion Bible app is, as we said, there's been 1 billion downloads around the world, and many millions, as you said, even in this part of the world, Australia and New Zealand. Talk to us about what it is, and then how you got involved, and what's actually a bit special about our region of the world.
Yeah, so the Bible app started actually as an idea in Chicago Airport in 2006, where the founder of the app, Bobby Grunwald, was standing in the security line wondering how technology could help people engage with the Bible more. And because at that time Web 2.0 was exploding, he thought maybe I could create a website. And so he created a website in 2007 where basically people could read and write notes about the Bible, and had about 20,000 people who visited, but very few of them came back. And so Bobby and the team decided we need to shift a little bit here. And so in 2008, they built a mobile-friendly version, and they instantly saw their engagement skyrocket because in 2008, you might remember, that's when the iPhone came out and Apple released or announced the App Store, and that opened in July 10, 2008. And so the team moved really fast to submit the Bible app as one of the first 200 free apps available on the day that the first iPhone was released. And at that point, the team kind of had this long shot goal, right? This long-term dream that maybe by the end of that year, maybe 80,000 people would download it. But what they found was instead, 83,000 people downloaded the Bible app in the first 3 days. And what the team realized was that from day one, people didn't just want the Bible on their phone. They needed the Bible on their phone. It took the Bible from a place on the bookshelf to the palm of their hand. And that's how it started to grow. And that's really where it took off.
It really then has just explored and explored and explored. And it's not just people who have a Christian faith who are downloading this app from the stats either, right?
Yeah, that's right. So even here in Australia, as I said, we're about to pass 8.4 million installs just in Australia. And our data tells us that a lot of the people who have downloaded the Bible app aren't part of a church or part of a faith community yet. They've downloaded it for some other reason. Now part of that might be, I think anecdotally, people download the Bible app because they get asked to do the reading at their sister's wedding or something, and they don't want to buy a physical Bible and have that. So they download the only free Bible app that they can find in the App Store or the Google Play Store and that's how they have it on their phones. And so one of the things that we're trying to do here in Australia, Clayton, our YouVersion Australia team, is we're trying to help church leaders across Australia connect with those people who live within driving distance of their building, their church building, who have the Bible app but aren't yet connected to a local church. And as we've been doing this over the last couple of years, we see and hear stories all the time of people who are finding a place in a faith community in their local town or their region. And I mean, there's not a weekend that goes by where a pastor from somewhere in Australia doesn't text me or DM me and say, hey, Dave, we had a new person, a new couple, a new family arrived to church for the first time today, and they told us that they found us through the YouVersion Bible app. And so they're the stories that, for me, that's my driving force. You know, that's the thing that I want, because I recognize the impact that not only God's word had on my life back when I was a teenager, but being connected in a local church, being connected in a faith community, the impact that had on me is profound. And so I want that for everybody who has the app on their phone, is not yet connected to a church. I want to figure out how can we connect them to a local church in their area, to a local pastor in their area, where they can feel that same unconditional love that I experienced as a 17-year-old. I want people to experience that on a regular basis.
One of the things that I know you actually do, and has been a huge part of what it is that it's always been free for people. Yep. It's one of it, and then it's sort of supported by various givers and churches in the States and things like that that have yep. done that. And also, it's always been very much trying to allow lots of different voices in. It's not just been sort of trying to isolate. It's often in life generally, we sort of go, well, I sort of really understand this view, and so I'm going to just promote that. And so the Bible app has like zillions of different versions that you can choose of the Bible, and different languages, things like that. But also then different contributors. It's very wide now. It's not just anyone can go. It goes through a process, of course, to make sure that it does. You know, someone's not putting a video up that doesn't actually talk about the Bible, all that sort of thing. But has that been a really deliberate approach from YouVersion to try and actually make that as inclusive as possible, or is it just the smartest way to say, well, this is a great way to get the most content in there and good content?
Yeah, we really are powered by partners, and the partners are the churches and the content creators like ministries and authors and worship teams. We're really powered by those people creating content that helps make the scriptures more accessible to more people. You know, our mission is everyone, everywhere, every day. We want everyone in every part of the world, and for me specifically, that's Australia, to be connected with and engaged with God's word every single day. And so there's a number of different ways we do that. As you said, we partner with a bunch of church leaders and ministries here in Australia specifically, so that when an Aussie opens the phone, whether they're in Melbourne or whether they're in Wollongong or in the Northern Territory, we want them to feel like this app was made for them. We want them to hear Australian voices unpack the scriptures in the same way that Rabbi Lubin did for me back in New Jersey. So we want that context, that Australian context to appear, so that when somebody opens up the Bible and reads a verse, they're not trying to figure it all out, what it means on their own, but there's actually some local Australian voices that are guiding them, are teaching them, showing them new insights and things like that. And so reading plans is one of the things that we do in order to achieve that. So we have lots of church leaders around the country and lots of ministries around the country who provide reading plans for people. And a lot of those are based on what we know people are actually searching for in the Bible app. So when you open up the Bible app, there's a search feature where you can, you know, it used to be what we would call keyword searches. So they could type in a word like stress or anxiety, and what would pop up is Bible verses that speak directly to that, but also insights from Christian leaders into those sorts of issues as well. And now, as you know, technology has improved, it's not just keywords anymore. There's keyword phrases, so people can type in things like, do I have to believe in Noah's Ark to be a Christian? And we want to make sure that there is content on there that are answering the questions that people are actually asking. Because what we find more and more, especially across Australia, is people are asking questions about faith. They are asking questions about the church. They are asking questions about the Bible. We are in a time, Clayton, where I really believe that Australia has tipped over from being a post-Christian nation to being a pre-Christian nation. And what that means is that people are asking questions. They're kicking the tires of faith. They're not as anti-church or anti the Bible or anti-Christian as they once were, especially when I was growing up. There was a recent study done by Deakin and Monash universities in 2023 where they surveyed a couple of thousand students. And what they found was 85% of students had a positive view, a positive perspective of faith, of Christianity, and of Christians. And so we know that there are people who are asking questions, and we are just calling on Australian churches, Australian pastors, Australian content creators in every field, whether they're in sports or whether they're on YouTube. We want them to start creating content that will allow Australians to connect on a more regular basis with God's word everywhere in Australia, every day.
Dave, we love your passion, love your heart, love the realness that you bring as well. So thank you so much for leading this up. Thanks for the connection, the encouragement. Thanks for telling your story today as well.
Yeah, man.
And we certainly do encourage people to download that app if you haven't already and start a journey, start an exploration as well.
Amen. Thank you so much for having me, mate. This has been fantastic.
Dave Adamson, my guest here on Towards Understanding.